to this episode of Compliance Deconstructed. We've got our lovely Elvan Baker, our wonderful Lorie Davis, and an absolutely superb guest speaker. He's been with us before, Marwan Kanafani from California. And on this episode, we're really going to focus on what Medicaid looks like in California. And Marwan is going to walk us through that. And what we're really interested in understanding, yes, we'd like to understand more about the regulatory space in California and a lot of its complexities. But we'd like to really make the point that Medicaid across the country is different in every state. And one of the things that's part of what we want to show you today is that, yes, California has its own unique programs, but so does every single state. And Elvan, Lorie, and I have experience outside of California to be able to show you a little bit of some of those differences. So if you're considering getting into Medicaid, it's really important that you understand the regulatory and structural differences of what Medicaid looks like and understand that it really is different from one state to another. So with that as context, Marwan, can you tell us a little bit about California? Why is it such a great example of complexity in the Medicaid space? What's going on?
Yeah. So one of the fun things about California Medicaid, which is branded as Medi-Cal, so every state has its own sort of brand and a way of referring to its Medicaid program. In California, it's Medi-Cal. It's one of the unique attributes of the Medi-Cal program is best explained also by its California's unique place as a little miniature country within a country, because it's such a large state, and it has such a huge demographic, kind of diverse population. The socioeconomic, but also some of the other just healthcare needs in general are really disparate. And then also some things that people don't understand about California is that 2/3 of the population resides in Southern California and 1/3 of the population in Northern California. And you have within those two regions also huge healthcare challenges in being able to grant access to healthcare for people who are in large cities like San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Sacramento. But then not very far outside of these cities, you have rural areas that, I mean, they look a lot like rural parts of Colorado and Utah and Wyoming and Montana. These are areas that have very low population density and in some cases very, very high rates of poverty. And so getting healthcare out to these folks is just very, very challenging. So you need one program, right? You need one huge program to be able to get 14 million or so people covered through Medicaid, something on the order of 50 to 55% of every births into the Medicaid program, in a way that works both regionally between Northern and Southern California, and then also works for people who are in urban areas as well as in rural areas, and then socioeconomic and then other demographic aspects of being able to deliver healthcare to such a diverse population. I think that is the beginning of the conversation of why California then does so many of the things it does. Like, we can go into sort of the social determinants and non-traditional ways of structuring their program. But I think it's rooted in sort of the unique aspects of running California as a little country within a country.
So why was CalAIM, what problem was it designed to solve?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we did a little bit on CalAIM before, just at a really high level. CalAIM is just a waiver, the name of the waiver that California has submitted to CMS to say, hey, look, we want to try some things in the social determinant, or what's known as social drivers of health space. And these are the non-traditional contributors or kind of factors that impact people's health. So the point of CalAIM is to widen the net and to almost mimic what we've learned in Europe around what the areas of health that get impacted the most may not necessarily be a doctor or a pharmaceutical or a lab test. It might actually be that the best way to help your child's asthma is to get a new rug, which is strange. Oh, wait, a new rug. Since when does Medicaid get new rugs for people, right? Well, part of CalAIM is a community support. That community support goes into a category called asthma remediation. Asthma remediation has a set of things that it will pay for, one of which are home modifications. One home modification that's been linked to asthma is a very dirty rug. And so in that case, we would figure out ways when we find that there is, that eligibility. CalAIM is meant to kind of go into address some of those upstream root causes that we see as being impacts on people's health.
I think that example is amazing, really thinking through. So I know we've all received a lot of comments for people. Well, I don't understand why we're using government money to buy this, that, and the other thing. But actually, there really is a logic behind it. And the logic is driven by a need to really respond to healthcare outcomes and not just use the traditional healthcare system, recognizing that that might not be the most effective way of spending our money, that sometimes the most effective way of spending our money looks a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And California seems to be, and I might be wrong because I don't know Medicaid in every state, particularly thoughtful about what those other methods of achieving certain healthcare outcomes might look like. I mean, would you agree? Is this an area where California is ahead of the game?
I think it's ahead of the game. It also has the money. There are always these, the ebb and flow of surplus and deficits in California, but by and large, it's the fifth largest economy in the world, right? So there are the resources to do it. There's also a willingness on behalf of both the state and the community-based organizations and the managed care plans to do it. You have a lot of like-minded people. You have a super majority of progressive folks into the legislature. So you have sort of what I consider to be kind of a constellation of factors that then helps to move things in a certain direction. Now, we can make it agnostic of how you feel about the political landscape by just this really simple example, to stick with asthma. Mm-hmm. If we see that it can cost someone in an apartment, if it can cost $300 to get them a new rug, and in doing so, we've been able to avoid a child going into the emergency room 12, 15, 20 times, we have saved 10 to 100x by changing the rug, right? So, we can talk about it as the right thing to do because it is. We can also talk about it as dollars and cents because it also is.
A return on investment. If we just look at it as a return on investment and start using that kind of language, the return on investment is really high.
It is. And I think we talked about this when we were prepping for the pod, which is now we're 5 years in. So a little bit of context. The original waiver was signed off by CMS to bless California, to give California the birth to do CalAIM. That was 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. We are really literally, March 24th, we are literally in the middle of a renewal right now where California is asking the federal government, will you renew again? The end of the year, our 5 years is up, and then we're going to renew for another 5 years. And to your point around ROI, the return on the investment, that is now where compliance starts to play a really interesting role. Because compliance is now obviously keeping us within the guardrails of expectations to do what is said, what we intend to do in a way that's safe, that's effective, and that's regulated in a way that we have all agreed are important ways to regulate so we mitigate fraud, waste, and abuse and such. But now compliance is being used in an interesting way to prove ROI, which I think is a really fascinating role for compliance.
Lorie, have you seen some of that as well, where compliance is used to prove ROI?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that exist in the Medicaid space is the Medicaid fraud units that are at the state level that
Mhm.
are really designed to combat fraud, waste, and abuse specifically for Medicaid. Each state's the affectionate name is a mafuku, but they're Medicaid fraud units at the state level, typically within the Department of Justice or the Attorney General's office, something like that. And they are designed to, work with each care organization. They're called a little bit different. I think in California, you call them MMCs. You don't call them MCOs, right, Marwan?
That's
Yeah.
correct. Yep.
So that is yet that is another fun thing about Medicaid. Even what you call yourself varies from state to state.
That's
But
right.
in California, those mafukus, they work with each MMC or MCO, so they don't have to work in a silo. If you've got a
Mhm.
problem with a unique provider, my affectionate name is Dr. Fulanito. That's Dr. Dude. That is my generic term. So if
There's no
Marwan's
such
having
person,
that,
right? Somebody's not gonna come back for a week. Has anyone done the research on this?
it
Dr.
is a generic
Fulanito?
Spanish term. It is a generic Spanish term that I've used for
Okay.
years. But, if Marwan is seeing this problem and he and I don't know each other, through the joint task force that is a Mafuku, we can identify that I've got a problem too, that Marwan's identified, and vice versa, where it
Mhm.
brings us together to be able to communicate. And then it makes the power of fighting fraud, waste, and abuse that much more powerful. That's
Mhm.
ultimately what I was trying to say.
No, that's superb. And what something I would just like to interject that's not as cerebral as what you and Marwan were speaking about, but for our listeners, hopefully you can already hear some of the differences in just our language and structure between what Marwan is talking about, Cal-AIM in California, and other Medicaid programs, bless you, other Medicaid programs that Lorie is talking about. So the differences in how organizations are named, how things are structured. You can already hear some of that in the discussion. And that's an important point I want folks to take away from today. Elvan, Marwan, was there more that you wanted to add?
No, what I'm wanting to have Marwan give us a little bit more because he has a lot more experience on this is what does it look like operationally on the ground?
So operationally, one of the things, I'll give you a really specific example of
Mhm.
something that I think is somewhat universal across the country. Care management. Okay.
Okay.
So care management, and that's also a very big umbrella term, and it's also
Mhm.
conflated by case management and care
Mhm.
coordination. But let's call it for now care management done by a health insurance company. Okay.
Mhm.
What is that exactly? What that typically looks like is that every member of a health insurance company, every member falls into some sort of risk profile,
Mhm.
low, medium, and high. Let's keep it simple. If someone is a high risk member, in other words, you see the member use healthcare a lot, you
Mhm.
see them in their disease states emerging, using more, you see patterns like they're going to the primary care physician, then they stop going to the primary care physician, then they go to the emergency room more, then they get admitted to the hospital more medications. You start to see this. We try to enroll those people in a telephonic program called complex case management, complex care management done
Okay.
by the health insurance company.
Okay.
That means that I, as a care manager at a health plan, have to do some telephonic outreach, literally just call. So,
Okay.
Elvan, let's say you are that person and I'm the health plan. I will try to call you and say, hey, how are you doing? I'm noticing that you've got a lot of stuff going on. I'd love to kind of help you manage some of the medications that you're on, or I want to make sure you're getting in to see your PCP. I'm wondering, what is it that I can be helping you
Mhm.
with, right? So on and so forth. Okay. What we have found is that telephonic case management is limited in its efficacy. A, it's really difficult for me to get a hold of you. B, sometimes you're into it because you have 20 minutes in your day to be able to talk to me. And sometimes you're just like, I'm sorry, this is like the 10th priority for me. I have to get my kids to school. I have to go to my job. I just
Okay.
lost my job, right? Okay. What we have found is we are going to try to get out of the walls of the office, and we're going to go meet
Okay.
you wherever you are. So let's say you're like, look, I got to go take my kid to school, and then I've got to go to the DMV, and I'm going to be waiting there for an hour. I don't have time for this call. What we're saying is, okay, is there a program that can be like, okay, Elvan, I am going to ride with you if you let me, and I'll go with you to the DMV, and on our way, I will have my little notepad, and I'm going to talk to you, if you're open to it, about things that I can be doing to help you navigate this really difficult moment right now. It seems like you're going through a really difficult moment. Let's use that as an example. Health insurance companies are not equipped to do that. The staff didn't sign up for it. We didn't hire people to do it. We don't really know how to compensate them to do it. There's a lot of liability around doing it. They're not trained. There's a lot of reason. I'm sorry?
Liability, yeah. All
Yeah.
I'm thinking is like, that's a problem. Like,
There's
that's
a
all
lot-
I'm thinking is like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a ton of structural things that just don't make that possible for us. And it's not scalable for us. So one of the huge components of CalAIM is something called enhanced case management, ECM. This is catching like wildfire across the country. There are Medicaid programs that are now trying to incorporate ECM as a benefit, which is essentially traditional case management, the way I described it, on steroids, to the point where that enhanced case manager will come to your house. They'll go to your office visits with you. They'll go to the hospital if you get admitted. They'll go to the ED if you're discharged. And even if you're waiting there, they'll go to the ED and wait there with you. They will do, essentially, if you think about it this way, ECM is a program designed to have a person take care of another person in a way that mimics the way you would take care of a loved one. And that is sort of operationally, now we can talk about all of the things that make that so difficult, but that's something that health insurance companies have never really been equipped to do that ECM now is attempting to do.
That is
Sounds like
fascinating.
It's fascinating, but to me, it sounds like an operational nightmare. That is almost, I mean, it just does. It sounds that way. And I have to put a plug in here where I'm not going to put that plug. Go ahead, Marwan.
No. I want to hear it, Elvan, because I think I love how you're thinking about this. You're immediately looking at this as like, wait a minute, guys, this is great intention.
I love the dreams, but
Great
I'm one of
dream.
those people. I love the dreams.
Yes.
I'm always the person. Great. I'm always the person in every conversation. Well, bar these two ladies, they can talk me sometimes, but I tend to be able to say, great, but
Yes.
And I think this gives me that feeling.
Yeah.
This sounds like an operational nightmare.
Yes.
Unscalable. Where do we even have the labor for this?
Oh my God, you're singing my song. This is it, Elvan.
Well,
you're
I mean, like, is there some
Yes.
bucket of people that were just all of a sudden they're like, hey, we are highly qualified, complex care managing people who also love to ride and change your cars, by the way.
Well, that's the thing, like from a regulatory perspective, like how are you auditing and monitoring this? Like that's got to be a system in and of itself. And I see it with my California ECM providers. They are being audited. I mean, California is making it work somehow. I don't know whether it's effective, but it is happening. So what are you seeing,
making it work
Marwan?
some way, somehow. All right, we're all going to learn.
This is so good, you guys. So this to me is where it really starts getting interesting and fun. Because look, we can sit here and design. I mean, I have a public health degree, and how many programs I've sat through designing and iterated on, even in my health insurance executive jobs, that sounds so awesome. The CEO is galvanized. The board is just
There's synergy,
excited.
right? There's synergy.
There's synergy. There's so many words, and this is going to be the best thing. And then it comes time to implement it, and it's everything that we're talking. And I think this is where, right now, I would say, CalAIM needs to mature. CalAIM needs to get its head out of the clouds, and it needs to go, okay, let our feet touch the ground, and let us figure out a way to put one foot in front of the next, and to get to the outcomes by solving for all of those operational nuances. So I think at a big level, and if you want, we can go into detail on which ones are the most interesting, but there are a ton of them. And this is just ECM, not to mention the other half of CalAIM, which is in community supports. We kind of talked about this before, which is Medicaid has this framework, and this framework exists across the country. I think, Lorie, in lieu of services are sort of right?
Yeah.
So there's a framework for every state to say, hey, I want to use this thing called in lieu of services to make giving everybody a cute pen. I want this to be a benefit. It's like, okay, good luck with that, but submit your request for an in lieu of service. So there is a framework for Medicaid states to submit to get things widened to kind of allow them to cover things, right? This is not just a California thing, but what we've done in CalAIM is we talked about ECM. We also have this entire kind of portfolio, if you will, of benefits called community supports. Asthma remediation and changing out the rug. That was an example of that type of community support. And with that, comes with a ton of operational nuanced challenges that if we don't solve for, it will be throwing really good money into programs, into areas that aren't giving us the return that we want. So Elvan, I think you're right on. You are right on about asking those questions in a really critical way.
And unfortunately, regulation is not one that, the words that we use, how operational nightmare, hard to scale, like these are the words that applies to tech startups highly, right? But the benefit a tech startup has is that it operates usually with less than 10 people, and you can pivot pretty quickly when you realize that you're in an operational nightmare and you're unable to scale. Well, the difference in these kind of scenarios is that it's a regulation. It took 10 years to pass it. It's not going to pivot, it's harder for it to pivot. I don't want to say it's not going to pivot, but the word that you used is so well put. It needs to mature. Maturing requires pivoting.
One thing that I want everyone to kind of think about is, Marwan, how many members are we talking about in California relative to, some of the other states like a Delaware or a Rhode Island or a Utah or an Idaho? I think when you're talking about operationalizing, Elvan, I think you're hitting it on the head. But the other challenge, the number of members that Marwan is facing is of a proportion that is so much larger than in some of these other states. So Marwan, how many members do you have in California that are incorporated in this?
Yeah, exactly. So 15 million members in Medi-Cal. So it's a huge program already. The eligibility criteria for ECM, for instance, it's pretty huge. I'll give you an example. Someone is eligible if they're a high utilizer, okay? And we know that anywhere between, let's call it 1% and 3% of an entire population, like a Medi-Cal program, is typically high utilizing. That is, they generate a disproportionate amount of healthcare claims and costs over a period of time. Then you also have people who are at risk for homelessness or who are homeless, right? And that's a certain percent. So it's a fair estimate would be that around 1.5 to 2 million people out of that 15 million would be enrolled in ECM.
Okay.
So it's a pretty large number of people.
I think that's essential, Marwan, though, to the conversation, because that number is the state total of all Medicaid membership for multiple states.
Yes.
Not just one state.
Something I want to explore. We're having a great conversation, but as much as there are challenges around operationalizing and also monitoring this beast of a system that's set up for all the right reasons. So there are a couple of challenges there. But I also see opportunity. There could be a lot of opportunity for innovation, a lot of opportunity for new players in the market. So if somebody who isn't experienced with California or California Medicaid program they're thinking, gee, whatever their rationale, I'd like a slice of this pie, or hey, I think I can offer really good, I think I can make a really great contribution.
Mm-hmm.
What is the system like? How do they start to get involved if they don't know that much? Let's say they're used to working in Pennsylvania. We have managed care organizations. Maybe they have a contract as a provider, and maybe they're a vendor. But how does somebody start to get involved in the Medi-Cal space in California? Is that something you're able to speak to, Marwan?
Yeah, this is a great one. I get asked this one a lot. I think the first thing you want to do is think about California. Again, we were talking about it's 40 million people. It's half the size of Germany, right? So you want to think about California as a gigantic market that you're not going to think about entering. You're not entering California. You want to enter San Bernardino. You want to enter Inland Empire. Or you want to, or maybe you don't, Elvan. You want to find.
I live there. I don't want to enter back to San Bernardino. No, thank you.
But how we want to frame it is which counties, right? Uh-huh. Which counties are the counties that will allow me to do two things: A, make the unit economics work for what I'm trying to do, and B, where can I make the most impact? For instance, if I want to do face-to-face encounters with people, right? ECM. You have to think about how you have a hub and spoke model where you're going to have an area that has a bunch of people, your staff, that get dispatched out to various people who need that face-to-face encounter. Well, it makes a difference if those people have to get in a car and travel 20 minutes versus 2 hours. It's going to cost you, there's a different cost structure. So the first thing I would think about is, let's say you're coming from Pennsylvania to California. You could probably create the profile in Pennsylvania of what county most closely mimics what I've been able to do in Pennsylvania. What county within California does that closely mimic? And start at the county level. I think people miss that. They want to enter the California market because they do the math. Maybe they need to go get some investors, and they say to their investors, there are 40 million people in this state, and here's the opportunity. You multiply this number by that number, it's going to be great. And then you get in, you realize you have so many counties with so many different attributes. So understand the counties of California, and then closely map what you want to do to a county you want to start in. That would be efficient.
So even if you do that, though, do you get paid by the county, or do you have to be registered with CalAIM as a provider, or with the MMS? Is that MMC or MMS?
Yeah, so a couple things. So it depends what kind of services you want to offer, right? Okay. You on some level need to be a Medi-Cal licensed provider, and that for that you need to submit documentation that substantiates what business you're going to be or what service provider you're going to be. And then there's always a degree of licensure that's associated with that, whether you're a medical group or a hospital or if you're a home health agency or if you're an ECM provider or a community services provider. So at that level, there is a licensure process, and there's definitely something that, once you have that, you can then kind of move forward. That one, I don't know, Lorie, if that one, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, if that closely mimics other states. I wouldn't have that. I don't know, the degree to which that's more complicated in California versus New York or Texas. I don't know if, Lorie, if you do.
Generally, you just need an M as in Mary provider ID as opposed to an N as in Nancy PI. You need that state level Medicaid ID in order to bill Medicaid, MMCs, or as a provider of any services.
But some states are different. Sometimes you have to do a provider enrollment into the state Medicaid program. But sometimes you can work with the managed care organization or the health plan and go through them without necessarily being registered as a provider, enrolled as a provider with the state Medicaid program. But then you'd be a vendor. You're treated more as a vendor than as a provider. And I just wondered if California was similar. Different states just seem to have very different structures in that sense.
I can speak to it from a vendor perspective. I'll give you an example. Vendors that want to do care management, want to do delegated functions for managed care plans. So managed care plans sometimes just can't do all the stuff they're supposed to do because of whatever reason. For instance, a health plan needs to launch a DSNP. It's like, oh my God, okay, there's a whole lot of new stuff I have to do. They'll go get a vendor, a third-party administrator to do that on their behalf. They'll hire them. That vendor, though, needs to be in California, for instance, NCQA accredited. They need to be auditable. I mean, they are now essentially an arm of the health plan, and they're going to be scrutinized as such. So I do think, and again, I don't know the contrast with other states, but in California, if you are going to contract with a health plan, that health plan is going to be audited and held accountable for the credentialing, the NCQA accreditation, the adherence to APLs and regulations pretty strictly. It's a very highly regulated, California market is very regulated, and it's audited every year. You don't get audits every once in a while. Every single year, if you are a commercial health plan or a Medi-Cal plan, you will get audited every year by both agencies. Both. You will sit at the table sometimes, and on one side you'll have one regulator and the other one is right there. And they're literally asking you questions at the same time.
And I've seen that. That's not the same in every state. It's not quite as consistent or as rigorous. And I'm thinking about this from that vendor's perspective or a provider perspective, and making sure that I work with so many organizations in California where they're not expecting that level of regulation. And what they really aren't expecting is for the health plan to come in and audit them quite as rigorously as they're being audited. It's actually from a compliance officer, a compliance professional perspective. This is fascinating to me. I mean, I don't, I sympathize with my clients and the vendors and the providers, but I mean, I understand what's going on. I sympathize in the sense that they're not prepared. They don't necessarily understand. And a lot of the findings are preventable, but they're not used to being scrutinized quite as often or so closely.
I do think as much as we are scrutinized, I don't think health plans are held accountable enough in a way. I don't want to say it this way, because I know it might be a little controversial. I mean, I've sat through countless audits, so I'm not saying I want to be audited more. I think what we're audited on I think that should be taken a look at. So for instance, I was in an audit last year where for some strange reason, the lead auditor was obsessed with our process around grievances and appeals. Obsessed. Now, grievances and appeals are a notoriously important and audited area because that's one of the few leading indicators of what's going wrong. Someone will submit a grievance. And you know that if somebody submitted a grievance, that was pretty bad because people would be compelled so much that they would submit a grievance. So the area is a good area to delve into. But just kind of saying overarching, I'm going to dig into your grievance and appeals process and I'm going to pick this process apart was an interesting one that they just chose to do. And we found out later that it's just because this person had a particular beef with the way that health plans do grievances and appeals. It wasn't even that our process wasn't compliant. It wasn't that we were doing anything wrong. It was just that they had a beef with it. And it's like, well, okay, if you have a problem with our G&A process, we can talk about that. Maybe you can talk to your boss because they're the ones who regulate us, who tell us how to do it a certain way. So I think in those ways, there's a little bit of room from the auditing perspective for certain teams to sort of choose where they want to focus. And I'll be honest, there's not a ton of transparency around how audits are actually structured. Why are audits focused on certain areas in any given year is a complete black box. And I think that could be looked at.
And I would agree. I mean, you've just spoken as a compliance professional to one of my biggest bugbears. I have always said, actually, compliance can look different and still processes can be compliant and still look very different from one organization to another. And I really hate it. I think it's unprofessional, to say the least, when somebody, a compliance professional, has a personal, specific perspective, and they use that as a stick when actually an organization or a process is already compliant, but they want them to be compliant in a certain way. Sorry, I know that's outside of what we wanted to talk about, but it really bugs me because it gives compliance and compliance professionals a really bad rap. And it's something I genuinely don't believe in. When I train people, I'm very specific. This isn't about your personal preferences. You're not there to tell the organization how to run their operations. You're here to make a judgment based on evidence. Are they compliant or aren't they? And if you don't like the way they're compliant, that's tough toodles for you. They're compliant. So sorry, that was a bit of a soapbox issue. But I hate when I hear stories like that because it really aggravates me. But what you're really trying to say
It takes
is,
time and resources away from the meat of the matter stuff. That's one of
yes,
the
it does.
I hate waste also.
It does. And it's confusing and it's difficult and just unnecessary, period. And then you can have the next auditor come in and have, be like, why are you doing it that way? Anyway, like I said, soapbox issue. But the point is, though, I think it's important for anyone trying to understand the regulatory space and certainly the Medicaid space in California to understand that these are some challenges and some issues that they'll need to be prepared to handle. The thing I did want to pick your brain about before we go is if the waiver renewal doesn't happen, what are the consequences?
Yeah. In theory, a lot of that stuff will have to decide. California will have to decide how much they want to pull from their general fund. And then MCP, managed care plans, will have to decide how much they would want to try to then make qualify through in lieu of services, or pull out of their reserves. They'd have to decide.
Huge implications.
Huge. I mean,
if the waiver isn't approved,
it's politically highly unlikely. Even in this climate, this political climate, it's highly unlikely they wouldn't get it renewed. It's very likely that they'll get it renewed with some caveats, a good number of caveats and changes.
Okay. All right. So with that, we're going to close today's episode of Compliance Deconstructed. Really great conversation. Those of you who are listening, hopefully you have a much better perspective on what's happening in the California regulatory space. And you can think a little bit about, how does that compare to the Medicaid space in your state? And if you're a vendor or an organization thinking about getting into California and working in California, you need to think about, well, what does that mean for you? Do you understand enough about the regulatory space in California? Question what you know, your current experience, and really think about what California, how that matches up or how it's different and what you need to put in place. What do you need to understand about that regulatory space and make sure that you understand it as you're making plans to enter that market? So on that note, you guys, thank you for a wonderful episode. It was absolutely superb. Marwan, thank you for joining us for a second round. You're a glutton for punishment, but it was superb and it was wonderful having you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Lorie and Elvan.
As being the person, all things California.
I know.
I love it. I love it.
Lorie and Elvan, I love you. Thank you for being on this episode and being so fantastic. All right, guys, we'll see you next time.